you know, it's always difficult to get the opening for this right, because it is the Sunday morning rant, it is with me, and it is Sunday morning. Well, actually it's Sunday afternoon if I'm being technical about this. It's a lovely day out there. It's sort of middle of December, just coming up to Christmas 2016, and this is probably going to be quite brief because my friends are in the other room there waiting for me to shut up and finish, because we're going to see Status Quo this evening. Unfortunately, as many people know, Rick Parfitt had a heart attack middle of this year, and he's unfortunately not performing this evening, which is a bit of a shame, but you know, we're going to hear the music, we're going to hear the energy, so hopefully it's the same. And we've got some really cracking tickets again, so we should really enjoy that. But more about that next week. So this week, what I'm going to start off with is I've been doing some bits and bobs, so I have a big backlog of things I've needed to do for a while now. Started to get round to doing those things this week. So one of those things was actually to do some intensive surgery, open heart surgery on a unit which is the Roland A-880, which I seem to have immense problems pronouncing for some reason. I don't know why. Anyway, this is, and I've showed it before on the rant, the Roland A-880. Now, what I had to do with this is I bought a 100 volt version of this, which is a Japanese version, and I wanted to take I don't like running step down or step up transformers in my studio because it adds another place for hum to come into the signal, so I try to always run everything native voltage if I can get away with it. Some stuff I can't, and up until now this was one of those things where I couldn't. So what I did was I bought a non-working 240 volt unit, and I swapped the guts from one to the other. So that's what I did this week. I did a video, it's on the channel, you can see how I did it. It's quite often quite interesting to open these things up and actually see what is inside them. Anyway, the question that came back was, what the hell is a Roland 880? So I thought I'd spend a couple of minutes just explaining what this thing is. So if you look at this, so if I put that to camera, you'll see there's 2 MIDI ins on that side and 2 MIDI outs on that side, and then on the back of it you can see 6 ins and 6 outs. Okay, so what this unit allows you to do is connect 8 ins and 8 outs. Oh, look at that, coffee's arrived, thank you. Well, coffee has arrived. Put that there. So what it does, it allows you to connect 8 input devices and 8 output devices. Now, why would you use it? That's probably the question that people have asked me on the channel, and the answer is, if like me you own quite a bit of legacy tech. Now, I'm not talking about the new stuff, so I'm not talking about your cronies and your sister mates up there. I'm talking about the legacy kit, so things like my M1 here, that's the D50, my DX7, and down in the racks here I've got a whole raft of rack units that are legacy, you know, made in the late 70s, 80s and 90s, when the only interface available for much of this stuff was MIDI. And what you ended up doing is, I did a piece to video on this, which is a little while back, about daisy chaining MIDI. So every time you daisy chain a MIDI cable from one device to another, you introduce latency. Now, depending on how well the manufacturer has implemented the MIDI standard on that particular keyboard, and some of the manufacturers were particularly bad at this, you introduce an amount of latency into the MIDI signal. So you can end up triggering a note on one of these keyboards here, or one of your controller keyboards, and it actually taking a significant delay before the sound is triggered on the keyboard or the unit that you're trying to trigger the sound on. Now, that's no good if you're playing and recording, because everything comes out of sync. Now, admittedly, with modern instrumentation, you can just kick it back in a bit. You know, you can do the quantizing, you can move the sound a smidgen one way or the other. but it's really, really painful. What this unit allows you to do is it allows you to take an input source or several input sources and specify using these buttons on here which output source that input source is going to. So I can say input source 1, I want to go to outputs 3, 4 and 5. Okay, this was around way before the computer interfaces, so many of you have probably got a Steinberg 1880 out USB interface, or maybe like me you've got the Mark of the Unicorn XT128 interfaces for doing the same thing. But they really need a computer in the mix to make them work. This does not. This has no USB interface to it. It literally is a hardware MIDI router. Okay, you can patch MIDI from one source to another source, and if you don't want to use it in that way again, you can just change the patch, and it's literally just a case of changing the patch by changing the button assignments on the front of it. It is a very, very, very quick way of routing MIDI around your studio. Okay, I've got 2 of these. This is the one I was working on in the week, and the other one is down there in the rack. And I'm just about to change my Mark of the Unicorn USB interface for an interface, and I can't remember what the name of it now is, but it's an iConnect interface that Thorman have been selling. I've done my research on it, and it's a much, much better interface with much better latency. And the other key thing about it is, whereas this XT interface I've got is getting on a bit, and Mark of the Unicorn is struggling with the drivers, the iConnect interface is bang up to date. Which actually brings me on to something else, and I had a rant about this a little while back, about manufacturers not carrying on supporting studios. So one of the things that I thought was a real shame, and I couldn't find anywhere for quite a while, was actually a pure MIDI, as in a 5-pin DIN plug patch panel. What I have noticed is there is one now being sold through Studio Spares, to the point where I've actually ordered 3 of them, because that would change the way I set my MIDI up quite considerably in my studio, and make it much, much easier to control the legacy tech. Anyway, back to this unit here. So that's what this does. It allows you to route from a source to a number of targets. And the other thing about this as well as remember is every one of those sources has 16 channels available to you, so you could have this route from source 1 to all of the outputs, but you could have different channels being triggered on each one of those outputs. Okay, so it will allow you to do that. It is incredibly flexible. That's the reason why I have them. Okay, for controlling legacy keyboards. If all you're going to do is have USB equipment in your studio, this is not for you. Okay, MIDI Roland A-880, and I got it right that time. The second thing I was going to bring up this week is, you know, me and my cheeky bids on eBay. Well, yes, another couple of cheeky bids on eBay, but this week I managed to pick up, actually I picked them up last week and I forgot to actually mention them on the blog last week, but I managed to pick up these. So these are sound cards, or waveform cards, for the JV series, the Roland JV series of synthesizers. Really, really good stock synthesizers. Now, I got rid of my keyboard version of the JV synth quite a while ago, but I still retain the 2080 rack mount unit. It's actually down there, and I use it quite a lot. It's very, very intense. It's, you know, it's one of those things. It's horses for courses. Like I've got a Jupiter here. Right? My Jupiter is incredibly versatile. I've got a Kronos here, incredibly versatile. I've now got the System 8 sitting up there. I'm still working out how the bloody hell that thing works, but from what I've seen so far, extremely versatile again. Different horses for courses. Now, the JV, I tend to use my rack mount units as fillers and stock sounds. So I tend to play with sounds on on the keyboards up here, but those units I tend to use for stock. If I'm looking for a bass sound, or if I'm looking for a trumpet or a horn or something like that, I don't know, whatever I'm looking for, I tend to be able to find something very, very quickly on the units, because I just know where to go. And I very, very rarely fiddle around with the sounds on the units themselves. I tend to, if I'm doing something more serious, in recent weeks what I've been doing is sampling the damn thing onto the Kronos and then twiddling around with it on the Kronos, if I'm honest. But that said, there are, and people know this if you watch my channels on a regular basis, I'm a great fan of having stock stuff on memory card, because it always works. Now, I bought two this week, and they were of really good value. One is Contemporary Composer, and I'll come back. So if you just look at the card itself, you can see it says for internal wave, okay? I'll come back to that in a minute. And the other one is the Rich Sound Collection, which is card number 6 in the series. And again, if you just look, it says for orchestra, okay, on it. I'll come back to that in a sec. So these are expandable tones or waveforms that you can then incorporate into your synthesis. And as I said, a JV280, I mean, if you can get hold of one, a JV580, they're sort of forerunners to the Integra, I suppose. You know, the Integra is where they ended up. But in terms of, you can pick these things up relatively cheaply on eBay. I think when I bought my JV280, I think I paid around about the sort of £100 mark for it. And you get a hell of a lot of synthesizer for 100 quid. You don't need a keyboard, but you get a hell of a lot of synthesizer for 100 quid in one of those units. So, you know, if you've got a master keyboard, you're away. And then you can buy these expansion cards for it. Anyway, the reason why this is good is because these got 2 expansion cards, but you have to be really careful with these, because some of them, even though they're expansion cards in a series of expansion cards for the JV series, can't be used unless you have a physical circuit board in the unit itself. So when the JV synths were marketed, what Roland did is they introduced a whole series of plug-in synthesis boards for the synthesizers. So effectively, you bought the synth, you then went and bought these plug-in boards, and they weren't cheap either. I mean, you're probably talking, you know, £300 or £400 when new, I think, for one of these synthesizer boards. So not only did you spend, you know, probably the better part of £2,000 on the actual synthesizer itself, you were then spending another 300 quid or so on these synthesizer boards. But they dramatically expanded the sound. Now, if you had a 180, a 1080 JV rack mount unit, you could only get, I think, 2 expansion boards in it. I might be wrong, but I've never had one of those, so I'm just going from memory. In the 280, which is the version I've got, you can have 6 expansion boards in there. So I've actually picked what I think are the best expansion boards. So I've picked the piano module, I've picked a percussion module, the orchestra module, the organ. Now the organs on that are just absolute peachy, they really are. The organ board, and a couple of others. So, and I've picked them all up off eBay. I've not paid full price for any of these, roughly around £100 a pop. And I just expanded it. But when you go and buy the expansion card, you've got to watch out, because it says on the expansion card that it will only work on your JV synth if you have the right physical board installed. Now, going up to the 5080, I think they had 2 different types of board that could be installed. So, you know, there's an even bigger gotcha there. So, you know, you could expand it in different ways. And as I said, to be honest, everything on these JV series synthesizers has now appeared in the Integra, which is why I say the Integra seems to be the natural way of going forward. But if you don't want to buy an Integra, but you do want some of that sound mapping, a really, really, really cost-effective way of getting you there. So, some more cards I've bought. And the final thing I want to just cover off today is I went to see a guitar or a quartet last night. I went up to Dean Street. Now, again, for those of you who don't live in London or don't know anything about Dean Street, there is a jazz cafe underneath the Pizza Express in Dean Street, which most people don't seem to know about, which is really good. So why am I telling you this on here? I should really shut up. Anyway, we went up to Dean Street, fantastic little venue, very low ceilings. You're sitting probably no more than from me to, in some instances, from me to the back of the synthesizer rack here from the actual artists themselves. Really, really fantastic venue. Anyway, long story short, we went up to Dean Street. I got taken up there by my girlfriend and my girlfriend's brother, because my girlfriend's brother's partner wanted to see a particular artist, and he happens to be playing last night. So we went up to see this guy. The guy was named Antonio Forcoine. Hopefully I've pronounced that right. He is an Italian guitar player. He plays in a quartet. The quartet consists of a bass guitarist, a cello player and a percussionist. Okay, I have to say I was not looking forward to going to see this particular person, because I'd seen some YouTube videos and I don't think they actually painted him in a particularly great light. But honestly, go and see this guy live. Okay, you will not be disappointed. So we sat down in the jazz cafe. You have food, so it's basically they're serenading you while you're eating. You have food. We had several bottles of red wine and listened to this guy. Now, the reason why I'm really sort of saying, not only is the music extremely good and extremely put together, and if you like sort of classical Spanish guitar, then you really will love it. It's probably not a synthesizer sort of piece, but what really set the night off for me is the percussionist. Now, he is a Brazilian chap, and again, hopefully I'm going to get his name right here. He's Adriano A-880. Okay, he is Brazilian. It's not a traditional drum kit by any sense of the, you know, he plays effectively what I would call traditional instrumentation. So instruments, right? So there's sort of like a bongo style bass drum, and like an interesting snare of arrangement. But what I really loved about this guy is he plays a lot of it with his hands. There's no sticks involved. It's all, you know, fingers and palms, etc. playing this stuff. And he plays something called a yudu, which is an earthenware pot. And what I've taken some photographs of it, and I'll show you next week on the blog what this thing looks like. But let me describe it to you. It's an earthenware pot, so it's round, it has a funnelled neck on it and hollow. Okay, and it's glazed, so it's a clay pot, and he basically what he does is he tilts it on its side like so, puts a microphone down the neck of the pot, and he plays it with his fingers on the edge, and the rhythms that this guy gets out of this udu, it's UDA I think it is phenomenal. His percussion skills are really good, and I would actually say go and see this quartet just to see the percussion, because you get some really good ideas. I got some fantastic ideas for percussion pieces from listening to him last night, and you know, it's some of the rhythms that he comes out with are very Latin American. Well, given the fact he's from Brazil, it's not surprising, but it's very Latin American in style. But they are hypnotic, and I was sort of like found myself listening to music and not eating my food. That's how good it was. So there you go. If you get the chance to go and see Antonio Forcoine and his quartet, go and see them. He's as I say, he's Italian, but he's based in the UK, so he tends to float around. But you will need to probably log on to his website, which I believe is antonioforcoine.co.uk, but I could be wrong on that. Got something with it written down, but if you do a Google search you'll come up with the guy. Go and see him, really good. Anyway, I'm getting some fingers pointed at me over there. I'm going to drink my coffee now. I'm going to shut up. and I'm going to go and see Status Quo. Catch you later. Bye.